man, my man, the mint, the legend himself, Steve Holm in the house. How are you doing, man?
I'm doing all right. Am I right in thinking you're competing this year? Are you in contest
Oh,
prep?
oh man, I'm still deciding on that. I'm doing a prep as best as I can. I'm learning posing. I've never posed before, so if all things go well and I lose the fear of it, yeah, I'll be stepping on stage.
Cool. Yeah, I saw some of your stories and I was like, oh, you look pretty lean. You're getting into some posing. I was like, either this is just someone who's very passionate about it or it's someone who's also competing this year. So yeah, I'm stepping on stage this year. So I'm feeling a bit tired today because just started a deload diet break. So the fatigue hit me today. I was like, I felt fine until today, kind of, kind of.
Yeah, I've been following your journey and you look also really, really lean. But I know you have to get leaner for the current natural standards, which are crazy, man. Especially in the hamstrings and the glute department. It's like crazy what you see these days, don't you think?
Yeah, the condition. I always thought conditioning was well, conditioning was a strong point for me. It is a strong point. Like I get lean, considering I'm kind of nearly 10 weeks out now from my first show, and I have some glute striation, some feathering in the quads, feathered triceps. But that just tells you how competitive it's now got because what was a competitive advantage for me is no longer a competitive advantage. And so, with my structure, I have decent muscularity. My structure is not the best. I don't, some shots aren't beautiful, which does penalize me. But so I need to bring the condition, like you said, to be that level of competitive. I'll get my hamstrings all the way through. It's getting my glutes from the rear all the way through, like from the butthole all the way to the outside of the ass cheek. This is what I need.
Yeah, that's also my case. I've seen lines that I've never seen before in my life, but the glutes, man, those refuse. Well, you can see some minor lines here and there, but it's tough, and it's tough to get to that point. And it's awesome, man, to get to talk to you. And that's actually where I wanted to begin as a thank you letter for all the work you've put out over, I don't know, man. I've been watching your podcast probably since 2018, something like that.
Awesome.
And and to me, particularly, natural bodybuilding didn't really exist until I found out about Revive Stronger. Because here in Mexico, it's like the usual path for a bodybuilder is like you join a gym, you get told that you need to use some stuff to get big, and if you don't, well, you're wasting your time. So it was funny because I was following Omar Isuf back in the day. He got Mike Israetel as a guest, and then because I searched for Mike Israetel, I got to your podcast, and then I found out there was these people called Eric Helms, there was Stuart Phillips, and all the people that you brought on your podcast. So I can safely say and assure you that your podcast, at least for me and a lot of people, friends that we talk about stuff all the time, it's been life changing, man, because you exposed us to another, let's say, reality of lifting that people can go beyond their expectations as a natural lifter. And to me, this particular live stream, it's pretty much a new high for me because man, you've done so much for the community. So thanks a lot for that, man.
It's incredibly humbling to hear and really, really nice and reaffirming of why I do what I do and why I started to do what I did with the podcast because it was a sense of, wow, there is this amazing information. For example, like Dr. Mike, when I landed upon him and James Hoffman and Renaissance Periodization, I read their books and we had them over here for a seminar. I was just like, gosh, these guys need to be bigger. More people need to hear them. And now, of course, they're at like 2 million subscribers over at Renaissance Periodization and they've outgrown Revive Stronger completely. But I'm glad I could lay a foundation and a platform for such individuals to broaden their horizons and get that education out for people like yourself, Daniel, because it's heartwarming because I literally posted yesterday about Matt Ogus going pro, and Matt Ogus was one of my earliest inspirations. He was kind of like the entry drug into natural bodybuilding and into evidence-based practice and everything like that. So it's amazing that Revive Stronger and myself can act like that for people like yourself or the community at large as well. So it's a beautiful feeling.
It's crazy, man, because back in those days, I was still a student. I was finishing my degree in nutrition, and well, I was dead broke. So books, let's say seminars were out of the question. But now you have podcasts that revive stronger that it was pretty much like a I don't know, a master's degree discussion on volume when you had Eric Helms, Mike Israel, I don't remember who else,
Menno.
but Menno Hesselmans, of course, to get access to all this information for free, man, it was mind-blowing and still is. And I think you've been one of the key, at least for me, inspirations to do this myself, to bring this information for people, at least here in Mexico and hopefully in Latin America. Um, that's exactly why I chose this topic to discuss with you, because in the current day, it's kind of tough, as you mentioned, with Revive Stronger, the way they carry themselves. It's a little different than it was back in the day, because now you have to take into account the thumbnails when you're talking about YouTube. You have to take into account Instagram, the way the algorithm works, because Facebook it's pretty much dead. That's the I know I'm pretty sure you recall these discussions via text on Facebook that you get to link papers and PubMed links and whatever, but Instagram doesn't allow you to do that. So pretty much changes the discussions on themselves. And I wanted to ask you to start the discussion. How do you think is the way you have to adapt over the years to keep yourself, let's say, on floating with your content, with the podcast, with the things you share as Revive Stronger? Because I think it gets tough, man. And also, not all of us want to take part into this clickbait type of algorithm stuff because I think it's draining mentally. But I wanted to hear your opinion.
Yeah, I totally relate to what you're saying because we started when I got into the fitness industry, like YouTube fitness was my August, and there was a few select podcasts. I'm trying to remember the podcast. The Fitcast was the podcast that got me into things, and it had guests like Lee Peel on the show, who I've had on the podcast a couple of times, but she's kind of like drifted outside of she's not as present in the fitness space as she used to be. Kevin Larby was the host of that podcast. I'm terrible with names, so I'm impressed that I can remember that name. Anyone listening who knows that, like, it was such a an amazing podcast for me, and it made me want to get into the fitness industry. Little did I didn't really spawn my podcast off the back of that. It was very much just a platform where I wanted to share information, and it's remained that way. There are times of which it's tempting to, like you said, kind of play the algorithm or play what's popular. And the only way I play that game, if you want to call it that, is by staying on adrift with hot topics within evidence-based practice. So it is like the volume debate or
Yeah.
London partials are hot. There's new studies coming out, so let's stay on top of that and stay adrift of that. But it's not in a way that's like clickbaity. It's trying to, and I never want to ruffle our audience the wrong way. I'm sure you'd see it with the content we put out, Daniel. You'd probably be like, screw the Revive Stronger podcast, man. They're just going for clicks. Like, what is this thumbnail? Like, I'm not interested in that. So I never wanted to lose the origins of where it began. And it was like credible, great information. And also, I think the guests, I'm not sure the guests would want to come on, like an Eric Helms. If I was going all clickbaity and trying to just become a shill for views and likes, he would be like, I don't want to be associated with that guy. That guy's a bit of an ass. Like, I don't agree with what he's necessarily doing. But he also knows, and he's spoken about this on various podcasts, like you have to be willing to play it a little bit, maybe, especially if you aren't a big name like he is. Like if we're little individuals within the space, if we want to get a broader reach, you could also harm yourself and harm your guests if you don't broaden your horizons and meet a wide audience. So I can say that even recently, I've had some strategies in mind and chats in mind with it to reach different people within the space. So I was very much, the podcast was interviewing experts, interviewing researchers, interviewing PhDs. Whereas now I will now and then have some select guests who I deem as credible in people with great expertise and a wealth of wisdom to share, but they might not be like a PhD. They might not be a researcher, but they have a broad audience who we can therefore get the podcast's eyes in front of, if that makes sense. And of course, there's not too many people out there like that, but I will do that. But I'm not that type of person that will go, I don't know, it kind of feels like selling out. I think that's what it kind of feels like, right? When you go down that route. And I think if that content rubs me the wrong way, I'd be a complete hypocrite to do it myself. So I straddle that line sometimes with some of the, well, actually, Pascal, got to give a shout out to Pascal Floor, the my right hand man, and he edits the podcast, does all the thumbnails. So he might straddle the line of like trying to get a bit of a clickbaity thumbnail, but you'll look at them and you'll be like, yeah, most of those sound like quote unquote boring, not super exciting, but that's just, it's not something we want to play with. And yeah, it doesn't sit well with me. But I don't know if that answered your question, but I definitely see it. And it is frustrating at times knowing that I'm sitting on a gold mine of information with the guests that I have, yet I'm not reaching the audiences of like a Joe Rogan.
Totally, and I can relate so much to that in this point of my life because, well, like I mentioned in the beginning, you were an inspiration to do this myself, to interview Eric Helms, Mikey Israel, and many, many more. And I've been blessed with that opportunity and now get to talk to you. But I found out that here in Latin America, I'm pretty much invisible in social media, you know. First off, because the obvious language barrier, which I understand. It's okay. It's fine by me. That's why I then upload it to YouTube so they can get subtitles and stuff like that to make it easier and to make it more accessible. But still, the social media itself, the platform doesn't really lend itself to this type of content, long discussions, minutia on topics like training, like nutrition, like mental health, and that's on itself frustrating. And I actually had a little bit of a I hit a wall a couple. I think it was last year when I was like, "Why am I doing? Why am I doing this, man? I'm asking these people to take time away from their day. People that are really busy like yourself, like all these researchers." But then again, I came to the conclusion that, well, who cares? This is important for me because this is the way I learned. Maybe someone out there could benefit from this, and that's sufficient for me. And yeah, I agree. You may have to play a little bit of that algorithm game, let's call it that. But it's okay because, well, we are still clear on why we're doing this. First and foremost, because this exposes to the latest research spoken by the researchers itself and by people that have been doing this for years, like yourself. So I think bringing that opportunity to the table with a platform like this, it's pretty mind-blowing. And that's why I have pretty much a love-hate relationship with Instagrams, for instance. But in this particular scenario, it's the love, it's way above the hate. So I wanted to hear what were your thoughts on that. But doing a little bit of a segue from that point, on regards to natural bodybuilding itself and fitness on itself, I think it's also a tricky game because now the standards, like you alluded in the beginning, are kind of surreal, unreal. Like people that claim to not take steroids or whatever look lean as big all year long, and well, maybe for the rest of us mere mortals, we can aspire to a great competitive physique. There's nothing compared to those people. And I'm sure you've got those messages that sometimes Steve Hall is now on the gear and sometimes he doesn't even lift. So how do you keep yourself balanced, particularly right now when you're contest prepping and it's already physically and mentally challenging? How do you keep yourself poised on the game and specifically in days like this that you feel a little bit more tired, straight on your game?
Yeah, it's so funny. It's that dichotomy for a natural bodybuilder. It's like if you're in a t-shirt, if someone see me, they'd walk in this room, they look at me and be like, I mean, I can't tell you go to the gym. You just look like this skinny dude that sat there. Whereas if you see me in the gym under good lighting with a pump on, I'm doing a bicep curl, suddenly that guy's on gear. And people just judge, it's that old saying of don't judge a book by its cover. So people are so quick to judge. They just see someone with a great physique and they're just like clearly enhanced because they don't know how long it takes or they don't know the insides of that book basically. So someone might look at yourself, Daniel, or look at me and just again, if they've only been lifting a year, they're like, man, I'm nowhere near that person. Clearly they're on gear. But if they went through the process for a decade and they would have grown a ton in that process, they look back and be like, man, I'm actually maybe I've surpassed Steve and Daniel or I'm close to them now. I totally get how they were like completely drug free at this point. I was just ignorant to what it took to get to that point. And so it is challenging because, I mean, back to social media, people are so short minded or short sighted. They wanted it yesterday. You can literally order. like everything to your door within like minutes, your food or whatever, your supermarket shopping, and drug use and drug availability has become rife from the looks of things. You got people on social media, teenagers who are sharing the fact that they're like on their first cycle or something. Whereas when I started, it was something I was completely ignorant to, that gear was even a thing, or it was never in my environment. So I just went to the gym for fun, and I thought I thought I could look like Matt August within like a few years. And I was like, there was a time in which I thought Matt was on gear, but like after many years of continuing myself, I was like, oh, dude, this guy started really young. He's a manlet in his own words, and he has good genetics. And so it totally makes sense that he's natural. And like, who am I to judge that person? So, yeah, it's like you walking down the street and seeing someone beautiful and just being like, I don't, well, not beautiful, someone rich. Let's use that example, and being like, they were born rich, like they haven't had to work for that. And it's really kind of rude and not very nice to that person who's worked their ass off to get where they are. So sometimes like you can look at it that way, but as a natural, I think most people, when people accuse us of being on gear or steroids, it's like, well, that's a great compliment because like people on gear and steroids are like they have an easier time getting jacked and they are more jacked than a natural. But unfortunately, I think normally those comments come from a place of complete ignorance of what's possible and a lack of investment into natural bodybuilding. And that's because they very much focus on the outcome and not the process. And coming back to your actual question of what keeps me going, because I've had comments throughout my time doing natural bodybuilding, because for whatever reason, I decided to go on social media and start documenting my progress from like the like early doors. I have old YouTube videos that are like from, I don't know, 2012, 2010, where I'm like recording myself on some terrible video camera, documenting my training sessions and just some posing as well. If you look back, you'll see some terrible posing by me. And yeah, I got some pretty mean comments like, you barely look like you lift, all of this. It's so funny. People are so negative. It's either you, again, hating on people because they barely look like they lift, or hating on them, claiming that they're lying and they're like not natural. It's like, people don't like to give credit quite often. I don't know why. So what kept me going was focusing on the process and falling in love with that. And part of that, actually alluding to what you said with the podcast, getting to talk to experts within the field, people who also love it, and learning from them and conversing with them, that's part of my process too. And I really enjoy that. So it's become something that like comments don't do anything to me. I just focus on doing the process because it's like brushing my teeth at this point, and I enjoy it more than brushing my teeth. So I'm going to keep going. So yeah, hopefully that answered your question in some sort of way.
Yeah, of course, and I can relate mostly because for me, natural bodybuilding, I'm sure as yourself, it's now the way you live. It's really an important part of your life. When we can discuss also the identity-based fitness and all this stuff, which is pretty interesting on itself. But natural bodybuilding, I think, as a sport and as a way of, well, going to your daily life, it's quite disruptive and quite revolutionary when you think about current times that you have everything immediately. Let's say your food, let's say a degree that you study quick something, and then you have some paper that says you're capable of doing something, at least here in Mexico and Latin America. And then comes natural bodybuilding. That stuff like, oh, you have to train at least 10 years to see some some meaningful differences. Jesus Christ, 10 years. If you would have said that to me when I was starting lifting, it was like 10 years. Are you kidding me? I'm not gonna do that. But now I can accept it, and not also that, I can embrace it because I know it's 10 years that I can better myself, that I can work on this thing that is important to me. But that also, it doesn't mean this is me. I am bodybuilding. I have another array of things that can go on in my life, which paradoxically, natural bodybuilding has brought to my life. Like, let's say, keep yourself going with the research, keep yourself practicing the art form of posing, which I recently found out it's quite fun and it's quite cool also. So all these things that you can learn from natural bodybuilding, I'm not saying that enhanced bodybuilding cannot teach us this, but at least to me, like I alluded, it was like a hitting a brick wall. I didn't know those things existed. I didn't know the gear existed. I just thought, well, these people look insane. I want to look like that someday. It would be cool. But I didn't know that you had to do that and you had to do it for the rest of your life, pretty much. And I quite never sit well with that idea. So natural bodybuilding brought that new light to bodybuilding to myself, and also the chance to speak like people all across the world, like yourself and many others, which again, to me, it's still mind-blowing and will continue to be. And hearing your experience with the sport and how you're carrying yourself, to me, it's really inspiring. And also to stay on this topic for a little longer, the way social media and particular Fitspiration works, this is something I wanted to discuss with you. Does it impact yourself and perhaps also your clients? Because I am aware of some research, qualitative research, that finds that for most people, inspiration, it's not really a source of inspiration, but a source of anxiety. And that's quite funny, honestly. So I wanted to hear your thoughts about these people that their whole image it's fitness, and how it's really not motivating to most people. It's really a constant comparison between how you look and how you should look according to social media. How do you, let's say you have a client that struggles with this, or maybe you at some point, I really don't know. How do you go about this conversation, Steve?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. The quote that initially comes to mind from what you said there is that comparison is the thief of joy. That doesn't just happen with body composition, it happens with whatever. You look at your mate's girlfriend, he's like, oh, man, I'm single and he's got this banger of a wife or whatever it is, you know? It's just like you always want to compare to someone else, or I'll do it with my dog. My dog's really not very well trained, and I'll see other people with their dogs. I'm like, man, that dog's so well trained. But you don't know how, like, they might have just landed that dog and it was super well behaved from the get-go, you know? Or our dog is a rescue and she's a bit crazy. She's a certain type of breed. So there's so many nuances and context within these comparisons that just completely remove that. And I think it's unfair. It's actually very interesting. It makes me think of, and I'm jumping all over the spot, but hopefully I'll come back to a good point. It makes me think of there was a bodybuilding show here in the UK. I think it was the PCA. It was a first timers show, and they had some reels of some of their competitors, and these guys were like hitting some shapes and whatever, not super muscular, not that lean, and people were just hating on them. Again, coming back to that, like people just like to give you stick online, unfortunately. And I did actually a response to it. And I was like, these are first timers. They're just getting their feet wet. Like the fact that they looked like fine on stage, they lost body fat, like they got their feet wet, they learnt the journey. I think that's awesome. And they're only going to get better from here. And they can look back in 5, 10 years and be like, holy shit, imagine I stood on stage like that and now I'm here. And that's awesome. That's part of the journey. I think it's similar within, I don't know, in your career as a like your business. If you suddenly won the lottery and your income just was like massive, you probably don't get that much pleasure from that. But if over the course of 20 years you've built a like huge amount of wealth, you'd be like, wow, look at where I started and look how far I've got, and the lessons I've learned, the people I've influenced, and now the knowledge I can share with others. Nothing, nothing really particularly rewarding comes easy, and that's why I think a lot of us fall in love with natural bodybuilding, because it is that epitome of delayed gratification. You have to get comfortable with it being like watching paint dry, and you have to get comfortable with investing heavily into something without seeing immediate returns. But when I think about, and if I know a natural bodybuilder like you, Daniel, I know that you have so many character traits that are so great to have in an individual. Like you're comfortable with investing into something without seeing immediate return. You're very patient. You're willing to work hard. All of those kind of characteristics that are vital to be successful in natural bodybuilding long term, they can be applied to other areas of your life. And I think it will just lead to a lot of success elsewhere. So I think that's what I try and enrich my clients with, if ever they're feeling like, oh, I don't look like X, Y, or Z. I always try and bring them back to their context of like, hey, you've got kids, you've got like a stressful life, like you're doing really well, you're still progressing. Look where you've come from, kind of smell the roses in a sense. And then also reflecting on all the benefits outside of just the end product of the physique. Because as I said, you get all these character traits, but you also get a really healthy diet. You have really great sleep, makes you way more productive at work, and you makes you a better person. You now have built a physique that's going to carry you through life better. So many long-term health benefits with bone density, that muscle mass that's going to carry you until your older years. Being at like a healthy body weight and body size, being having that muscle mass to be able to be active and do these things when you are, I don't know, retired and you want to travel the world. I think a lot of these things, they're side benefits that many of us just forget, and we're too focused on, are we there yet at that end goal? And I think just kind of sometimes smelling the roses is really important to reflect upon those things, and knowing you are your own person and being proud in what you've done and your process. I like to say that to clients where it's like, you don't know how hard anyone else has worked towards X goal. You only know how hard you worked and the efforts that you put in. Be proud of your efforts and the process that you've delivered, not just the outcome. Because as a bodybuilder, at least, I know this for myself. And when you step on stage, Daniel, if a judge says, no, you've come third, you need a smaller waist, you need bigger delts, and they judge you for that, right? But that's their job. That's what they're there to do. You don't let them tell you your worth. You know your worth intrinsically. You know how hard you work to get to stage and what you put on the line for that, and kind of the effort you put forth. And I think that's where you can get so much reward from it. So yeah, there's some of the ways that I think about it. But it is funny in some way when you start bodybuilding, you're fine with your look and physique, and then you start and you're like, you have body dysmorphia for life for a lot of people in that sense. But I think you get to a point where when you do focus on all the things I said, you're not satisfied with your physique, but you're kind of you're proud of it. And I think that's the differentiating factor. I think you can be very proud of the physique you've got, and always ground yourself in the broader context of life where we're on social media. You see the creme de la creme, the cream rises to the top, the extreme physiques rise to the top. So you don't see most of the time lesser physiques, more average physiques. Those people also often don't post, they keep it to themselves. But when you go on holiday and you go on a beach and you take your top off, you are within the top 2% of individuals on that beach in terms of like physique. And then you realize, oh, actually, I'm not as like low down as I thought necessarily, but still, that shouldn't mean as much as all the intrinsic rewards we get.
Yeah, totally. You made me think of Brian Whitaker. He's not on social media. You never hear about the guy, and he does accounting, I think. But then when he steps on stage, he's like, Jesus Christ, what happened to your glutes, you know? And also one thing that I came to terms with natural bodybuilding, it's something that you mentioned that with clothes you look fairly athletic, fairly thin, which it's something that in my early years lifting, it kind of bothers. It did bother me because I wanted people to know that I live, that I have, according to myself, big arms, the, you know, all this sort of narrative, internal narratives. But nowadays, I think that's one of the coolest parts of natural bodybuilding, that with clothes, especially oversized clothes, you look pretty much average or even below average. But then you start posing, you start training, and you become other person. And I think that for me at least, it kind of helps psychologically to sometimes believe myself that I'm posing, that I'm doing this job, that I'm actually, well, a bodybuilder, let's say it like that, that I'm a real bodybuilder. And then when I put on my clothes, it's okay. I can go back to my life, to my business, to my family, to enjoy all these other aspects and not constantly be measuring my biceps with the person next to me, which I used to do. I was like, "Ah, I think I can do it, you know? And it's so mentally draining, you know, to live like that. And now with this other approach to natural bodybuilding, I found it all the more healthy, the more sustainable, and also enjoyable. It doesn't take away from my life. It can bring something to my life. Man, it's so cool to discuss these things with you, honestly.
Oh, good. Yeah, that message you said at the end there, where bodybuilding should complement your life, not take over. If you're finding all these negatives associated with the thing that you're doing, either you're approaching it in a way that's not successful and not positive, or it's not for you. It might not be for some people, especially competitive bodybuilding, because like you see in the research, the amount of body checking you do and the relationship with food, it does become very challenging, and you aren't healthy within those final months to stage, and you need to recover from that. So you don't have to take it to that level, and I think for a lot of people, they shouldn't in that case. But yeah, it's funny the comparison, and then I like what you said there because I was thinking about it's like Superman or whatever, Clark Kent, and then he's Superman, and you can kind of hide away. And I think we all think of the big guys on gear or what have you and think that they must love the attention or whatever. But I think they get to a point where they're sick of it, where people are just like looking at them like they're a freak, right? You kind of like the idea of people looking at you and think you're big, but the same, like they can never hide away like a celebrity out there,
Yeah.
like you're Justin Bieber. You can't walk down the street without people being like flocking over or like wanting to touch your arm. Whereas, yeah, it's kind of nice that we can be like an undercover bodybuilder in that way.
Yeah, totally, totally. I completely agree. And also Superman. Funny that you alluded, man. I think we do have a couple things in common. I have a Superman comic here.
Oh,
I think,
nice.
yeah, for real, man. I think he's a really cool character that for most people goes under the radar because he's so damn popular. But in Superman, I'm sorry for the segue. The Superman character, I think it's really cool because he's almighty, he's all powerful, but the guy chooses to help people, you know? It's like he could do whatever he wants with his powers, but he instead chooses to be a good person. He strives to be a better person to help others. So I think the way for us, I'm kind of allowing myself to speak for yourself to put this content out for free, to honestly and from the heart try to help people on their journey. I think it's kind of Superman-like. So that's something interesting to at least get to think about. But to segue on the discussion, the first things I wanted to ask you is how you go about your own content production, which I don't really like the term content because it's something like you have to put out for Instagram to, and it's expendable. It's more like the things that you want to share because you think are valuable. I think it's a better way to put it, at least for me, because content is like I said, something you just put out because you have to, because if not, Instagram buries you in the algorithm. But how do you go, Steve, as a content consumer? Do you have any do's, don'ts, like I don't want to follow these people, I don't want to see stories because that takes away from your time. And also, being honest, as a natural bodybuilding, you can look to the profiles of your other competitors and go like, oh my God, I don't have what it takes to beat this guy. As a consumer, how do you go about it, Steve?
I'll touch on that final point because it's actually funny because I don't typically, when you're in your off season, I'm not really focused on other people and that sort of thing. I'm just like, yeah, it's fine. We're all like soft. I'm not competing. But I do know some people that are competing again. I'm going to be competing against in about 10 weeks' time. And it does play on my mind. I do find myself looking at some of their photos and be like, can I take them on that shot? Oh, they're going to take me on this shot. And I don't like this because we both know better than anyone. You can stand in different lightings, you can have different angles, you can have a pump, not a pump. You can look amazing on your own. But when you're on a bodybuilding stage under the same lighting, the same tan, and everything's revealed, you can look very different, put it that way. And you see it with, especially on the enhanced side, you see some guys, they're like documenting their progress, and you're like, oh, that guy's a shoe in to win. And you see them on stage, and you're like, oh wow, he had 10 pounds more fat to lose. Oh, okay,
Yeah.
right. Like they needed to work on that. So I try and remind myself of that and know it's smoke and mirrors and that there's potential for editing too. And again, focus back on me and my process and what I'm doing. And I mean, I've competed now, this will be my fourth season. I'm not that like amazing bodybuilder who's going to be winning every show. I know I'm not that person. So if I can just improve my physique upon like, the year before, hopefully improve upon my placings as well, hey, I'm proud of that. Or if I just improve my process to stage, I already feel like to have got to the point I'm at now, I'm like, wow, Steve, you got to similar levels of condition as what you achieved peak last time, and you feel great. Like life is good. You're not trashed. You're on good food. You haven't had to wear a stupid weighted vest. So that was a lesson. I didn't have to wear my weighted vest, and I'm glad about it because that was a pain. So like I've already taken so many lessons from the process, and I think if I was so focused on again the outcome and what other people are doing, I wouldn't have kept going. But I treat everything like myself, I'm n equals one experiment. Like we like looking at the research, but what's happening with me? How can I apply that to others? How can I learn and better myself as a coach? So that's kind of that part of it. In terms of social media content production, I think the first and foremost place I start from is it has to come from something I enjoy. And unfortunately, like you said, Facebook, where you could write quite long, like almost blogs, mini blogs.
Yeah.
I started my content production writing and doing blog articles, which I do actually enjoy because doing that process, I learned a lot too. I really find I learn through kind of writing out and kind of editing it and making it sound simpler and easier to digest. But as you know, video content is just so much more popular. I even know I'll listen to a podcast much before I try and read an article somewhere. It's just my brain doesn't want to do it. I'm much prefer absorbing it through the kind of listening. So I had to get comfortable with moving towards that. And then it's always just keeping that core of what do I enjoy. So I massively enjoy interacting with people like yourself, the people I bring onto the podcast. I'm reading the research anyway, so if I can get the person on to talk about it, even better. I've got to stay adrift of my education for my clients and myself as well, my own results. I want to stay adrift of it. So it's a joy to do that, and I'll invest time into that. But other areas, I'll almost do the minimum effective content, put it that way. So the least I need to do to keep it going and building. So with Instagram, man, you see people and they must spend ages, or they have spend lots of money on editors to spend ages to put stuff together. And I look at the core of their content. What are they saying? You probably see this too, Daniel. And you're like, you just spoke for 15 seconds on this reel, and the content you actually spoke was poor. Like there was just nothing. Like the value there is so low, but there were so many flashy things and this amazing caption and this B-roll that came through that was really attention grabbing. And I'm like, oh, I just don't want to play on that game. It's too much time and effort invested. I would prefer, and something I've been doing recently, and I found they seem to work on social media and training. So I just record my training anyway. So it's a video of me training. That's like the B-roll, and then I'll just flash up some text and like a like value add, and then a written caption that has more nuance and information. And so I've kind of found that I enjoy it. It seems to work through the algorithm, and I don't feel like I'm selling my soul or spending too much time and effort on something that, like you said, it's here today. In a month's time, I won't remember that reel. No one will remember that reel. In a week's time, I'll have forgotten about it. Everyone will have forgotten about it. So I don't put too much time and effort into those. The podcasts, though, people can search those, they can review them, they can be kind of evergreen content in that way. And so I want the podcast to be high quality, done to a high standard. So I always do my due diligence of research, whether that's a paper or a person. I have my questions ahead of time, make sure that's all up to scratch. And I'm not just regurgitating things or repeating content. I always want to try and put my personal spin on it. So yeah, that's kind of how I go about content production. And yeah, it's frustrating because Instagram, sometimes it's the things you put the least time and effort into do the best. And I used to spend a lot of time on what they called infographics, because I used to enjoy those. Because again, it was kind of like the blogs. I get to spend time researching a subject, putting it into punchy kind of informational slides, and then put it out there. But they just don't. They don't get the clicks. They don't get the shares like they used to. So I needed to keep up to date, and now it's reels and that sort of thing. So hopefully that made sense.
Totally. And for me, it's also a journey of discovery of what works for me, what sort of works with the algorithm, because I'm not a big profile. And also on a personal note, that always surprises me. That to be honest, I'm not a big profile. I mean, I'm below 10K followers, and people like yourself take me into account. People like Eric Helms, like Mike Israel, that have big ass accounts. And I don't know what you guys think on the first DM that I tend to send, but it's like, who's this guy? You know, he wants to talk. He wants to. He's pretty much a small account, and that always surprises me. And I have to say, uh, all the people that I've got the chance to talk to, of course yourself included, are so kind, man, and are so willing to discuss about their craft, about their research, about what they do, and they're so passionate about it. So that's something that stays with me for the, I think it's 2 years that I've been doing this sort of content. But also in Instagram, for me, it's kind of a tricky one because uh, the way I do Instagram stories nowadays, I just look for a paper that I found out during the week that I think it's interesting. I edit a little bit of image, so I go through a couple stories of me training because, like yourself, I always record myself training, so there's no much effort there. And then I share a small conclusion, which I know it's content that's gonna go away in 24 hours or less, but to me it's okay because by doing this, Like you alluded in your podcast, you get to learn yourself. You get to expose to the current research, I'm sorry. And I think this is an interesting way to educate yourself and to keep doing it because you have this sort of make-believe compromise with your followers that most people probably just keep stories and whatever. But it's there, and it helps you to go through all these troubles to put out this information and also bring something that brings value to people, not just content. So I think this is the hardest game to play. And I wanted to ask you about the way some people are doing it now, like for instance, Meno, for instance, Dr. Mike, that sometimes it's a little clickbaity, but not really. And myself, I couldn't do that. I don't know how to. I don't know how they get to be a little bit clickbaity, but still bring quality information. What do you think about this? Let's say, because you mentioned RP that grew like crazy, this new way of making online content.
Yeah, you've just called out Dr. Mike and Menno Henselmans here. I've heard it. You're bad mouthing them completely. No, I totally feel it. I think anyone in our space, like in our little niche, knows exactly what you mean by this. And I got to admit, sometimes I find it triggering. I used to with Menno, with some of his, I can't remember what one of his titles were, and it was something along the lines of like diet breaks are a waste of time, something like
Yeah.
that, something like that. And I just remember being like, no way, like that's not the conclusion here. It's like yeah, that screams of bias and misinterpretation, maybe. But I now kind of get it because, again, if you put up that kind of clickbait, it baits you in, and then hopefully you actually read what the person says. And they typically, if it's Menno and Mike, they're going to have a nuanced perspective. Then they're going to talk about it in depth and they're going to get a further understanding for you. And whenever I have tried like a bit more clickbaity type of content that makes me a little bit uncomfortable, I definitely get more engagement. But there are still people that will see it and they're at risk of just sharing it because they haven't read the nuance, they haven't read anything about it. They're just against diet breaks. They just share that and they're like, yes, told you diet breaks are trash. It's like, did you read it? No, you didn't. So then it just perpetuates a bit of misinformation and it's attributed it to an expert, which isn't great. So it's a challenging one. And I know with Mike, he as they grew, they went into I guess the type of content was less educational. There was still education within it, but it was more entertainment, like where he's critiquing various celebrity workouts and what have you. And I get it; it's necessary for them to have got to the size they are because we are just so niche, which is probably why the Revive Stronger podcast is the size it is because we have kept quite niche. But not to say that's the only thing. They obviously have worked on thumbnails and all of that content. And Mike himself is unbelievably entertaining. And so,
Yeah.
like, he just let the comedic Mike come out, which was great. So, but obviously, Menno isn't that way. He's funny in his own way, but not quite. He's a bit more serious. So, yeah, it's something whenever I go to make a clickbaity title and I've thought about it, I always find myself putting in like a little precursor. So it's not black and white. So I'm like, rather than saying this will exponentially improve your gains, I'll put this may exponentially improve your gains. And I'm like, when you put that may in there, Steve, I know you feel better about it, but now everyone's not as excited. And so you might feel better about it. There might be a few people that are like, yeah, Steve, thank you for putting that may in there. I appreciate it. But most people are just going to swipe by talking about. He's putting May in there. But I always appreciate someone like Brad Schoenfeld because he always is very like clear about not being black and white. Broad ranges, mays, maybes. We need more science. So I appreciate Brad for that because that helps, and someone like Eric Helms that helps. But yeah, when you look at the biggest accounts, they're the biggest accounts for a reason, and they've grown to the size they have for a reason because they have managed to kind of play the algorithm or play the social media game a little bit better than others. And yeah, you just have to be comfortable with finding your line where you draw that line. Like you're, I think as far as I'm concerned, they haven't gone over that line. They haven't crossed it of like talking pseudoscience or hyperbole. Uh, yeah, they still keep it credible. It just sometimes they use a bit of uh, clickbait in some instances.
Yeah, for real, for me personally, well, where I draw the line, it's ill talking about people like this guy's an asshole, and when it gets personal and stuff like that, I don't find it, I don't find any value in that. Some people claim that it's to fight bad practice and charlatans and stuff like this, but personally, I think it just goes to show that it's not really about the information. It's about exponentially growing your profile or whatever, which is okay. It's okay. It's a business. We need to eat. We need to live and live well. I totally understand that. But something that, to me at least, guides me through this this complicated maze is to keep it honest to myself, not to pretty much anyone, which is something that I indirectly learned from your content, because your account, it's sufficiently big, I think, for you to be exposed to new clients, to dedicate yourself pretty much to bodybuilding as a way of living. But not to the point where you grow so big that now you're like Joe Rogan, some stuff like this, that gets to say stupid shit all the time, and then they never, when they get it wrong, they never retrieve it. I think that's, I don't know how to put it, something that I learned from you that you never actually mentioned, something that you just do, and me as an spectator, as a consumer of the things you put out, you get that through the content that you put out.
I appreciate that a lot. Yeah, when I think about where I am today, a lot of the content I put out is what would Steve of me earlier have wanted, what style of content, and I try and feed that person. And that kind of makes me feel good knowing that I'm feeding that person rather than just trying to grow to an arbitrary size or what have you. Like you said, I'm so blessed that I get to coach people for a living and I get to work from home and I get to like basically train when I want. There's so many like huge benefits that natural bodybuilding has given me and the evidence-based space has. I wouldn't want to kind of almost abuse that in some way by selling myself out a little bit in that way. And it just isn't my part of my character. I think I'd struggle ever to do that. And yeah, I think it maybe shortcuts growth in some way, but I think also when you do sell out, you have a quick fall, like you have maybe a sharp rise, but you'll quickly come back down. I don't know if you've ever seen content from Eddie Abu. Do you know who that is?
Not
If you don't,
unfortunately.
good. But he had a quick rise to fame. I don't know, millions of followers over on Instagram, and he just talks a load of tosh. Basically, tosh is probably some sort of British slang that I've now used, and I make my sound really posh. But anyway, he talks out of his ass completely, and thankfully, people seem to be not paying attention so much. Obviously, he's got like a following now and a cult following who love what he says because he just talks in black and white terms. He's just like basically going to supermarkets and say, "This is shit.
Yeah.
Eat eggs." Like that's basically his take. If I was to try and give it, and yeah, there's some truth to what he says in terms of like ultra processed foods and eating quality nutrition, but the falsehoods he goes on to then say he just dots in there is so bad, and it's unfortunate because, like you said, with Instagram like people don't get to see, oh, he's referenced that with a PubMed study or whatever. Like you don't get to see that. And so people can make themselves sound like experts if they just speak confidently enough. And I think we're both at a point where we've gone through that Dunning-Kruger, if ever we were there where we thought we knew more than we did. But we get to speak to smart enough people where we're like, wow, like they are smart. Like I'm a small fish in a big pond, and so I always make sure to understand where my like knowledge is and where my expertise are, and not speak out of turn. And yeah, the ignorance some people have and the ego they have to think that they're that smart, and yeah, it's scary, but it does work on social media for a short time at least.
Yeah, funny man, because I've gotten some cases where after a conversation, I don't know, let's say Brian Minor, I recall that one on Progressive Overload. Man, I got a headache afterwards because it so much minutia that I've never thought before in my life. And because English is not my first language, I was like, Jesus Christ, man, I need a break. And I get it. Now that you you finish that conversation and you go about your daily life, it's like, and I know nothing. And that's cool because you get to learn more, you get to experience all these conversations, which I think are so valuable. My man Steve, almost an hour in. So just to finish off and be super respectful of your time, I just wanted to ask you one last thing that I'm pretty sure you must expect this type of question. But what word of advice would you give to people that maybe are starting their own journey with the use of Instagram, YouTube, whatever, and they want to keep it, let's say, real to themselves, or they're in this scenario that we're both being in, that you don't know how to conduct yourself, if you want to create this sort of clickbaity content for the most part, or how to create more valuable content that can help yourself and also the people that consume it.
Yeah, great question. Oh wow. It's it's one of those where I think because I think first of all give yourself grace because I think it's easy in this day and age because of the experts that are out there and because of how stupid you can sometimes feel in comparison that you have a what's the word? Um, hmm, it's gone by me where you feel kind of like a fake. I can't think what the word is, but you feel like a fake. And so you're kind of worried to share any information because you're like, what do I know? Like there's so many experts out there. Why would anyone listen to me? Imposter
Oh
syndrome
yeah,
was
yes, yeah.
the thing I was going for. And I think I was within that for sure for a while. And it took me a while to get confidence. And I think a little bit of imposter syndrome, especially at the start, is a good thing because that will keep you humble. Because otherwise, you'll be like some of these internet guys out there who will critique, you know, some of these massive bodybuilders who have tons of experience, loads of like practical knowledge, and they read, I don't know, Brad Schoenfeld's textbook once through, and they think they know everything. It's like, ah, oh, God, like eat some humble pie a little bit now, and yeah, eat that ego a little bit. So what I would say is talk about the thing I found initially that helped me at least. Let's say this talk about your own journey and experience. That really helps. So if you just talk about your training, your nutrition, why you're doing it that way, because you've researched it, you're doing it for a particular reason, it's just about you. You're not telling other people to do it that way. So you can feel very confident about sharing it because you're not telling others what to do and you're not doing anything like this. You're just sharing your process. And I think that's a great way to introduce yourself to social media and get comfortable with sharing ideas and thoughts. And then as you build a client base, you get results with them. That builds confidence within you, builds confidence within your audience. You share those results. What did you do with your clients? What worked? What didn't? And talk about what you feel knowledgeable on and don't feel like you have to kind of keep up to date with the latest research reviews and articles and try and digest those and break them down. You're not a researcher. That's not a skill set you necessarily have at the start. So talk about the things you're very confident about. And then as you grow in confidence and knowledge, you'll get better at talking about more things. So I think that's where, and always just remember kind of what your initial goal was of going on social media. And yeah, remember your core values at the start and maybe set yourself like what's it called? Like hard rules of what you're not willing to go past. I think anyone listening to this is probably in a really good spot because they're following yourself, Daniel, or hopefully following me, and I think that says a lot about them as a person and their character. And so, typically, for someone like that, I would say they need to be like build confidence and talk about things that you're confident and know about well, like the well-defined areas like energy balance. There's still loads of people confused about energy balance. That might seem really simple to you, but talk about it. Talk about it in a really simple terms, how you've helped people get into calorie deficits, whether or not that's through their step count or whatever it might be. You know, remember that because I think we can get very caught up in, like you said, Brian Miner, oh, he's talking about all these like big ideas and very nuanced things and oh, that's confusing. Don't try and like copy and paste what he's now told you. Put it into practice of like what are you doing in the gym? Oh, you're trying to beat last week's workout, progressive overload. That's important for hypertrophy because of X, Y, and Z. Oh, that feels quite comfortable and simple to me. But the people following you are like levels of knowledge below you, and they want to learn what you're doing and how you're getting there. So I think that's kind of where I would start. I think for your average kind of person getting into like fitness educational content.
And that was awesome. I think that was a great way to finish
Oh,
this
good.
conversation. Yeah, of course, man. A little bit of imposter syndrome there. Yeah, I always get that, man. I still get that after all these years that I've been trying to better myself with what's the term for this? Continuing education, getting exposed to this type of conversations. It still is. I'm still a little bit afraid of showing my progress with posting recently because I don't know shit about posting. I've been doing for a couple of months. I get that. I understand it. But something that I've learned also from all these conversations, this one particularly right now, is to just do it, man. To put yourself out there because not all the people that can see this because it's important to you. And I think that sets your mind on the right spot and gets you to continue to do it, not because you want likes, the impress other people or whatever, but because it's important to you. And that, man, makes a world of a difference. So, Steve, just to thank you once again, and not just for the conversation, for all the work that you've put out over the years. Trust me, man, it's really appreciated here in Mexico. I've talked about the Revive Stronger podcast with friends. We started our own podcast inspired by all this. It's called Gym Rats, as someone would
Awesome.
expect, of course. So, so we're trying to do our a little bit of the hard work of getting this information to people in our particular space. So thanks for that. Thanks for taking the time. I wish you all the success, man, in your competition. I, of course, will be following you close. And that's pretty much it, man. If you allow me, I'll be uploading this conversation just as is to YouTube so people can watch
For
it with
sure.
subtitles and all that. So anytime you want to come down to Mexico, man, you're more than welcome. You have your own home here.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your time, Daniel. It's been a pleasure.